responsible business education. So this is an area that there's been a huge growth of interest in, that we've heard from schools debating the issues. Demand from students. There seems to be little doubt about this current generation being particularly motivated by the idea of some social outcome and not simply perhaps some of the more traditional foci of their objectives in careers and in turn in the training provided by schools. We've, as part of our rankings work and our general reporting and coverage of business education, certainly heard an increasing demand from business schools to discuss these issues, to try to reflect them in our metrics and our reporting more generally. And so we decided that it would be quite important to be providing more coverage of these issues. So we actually launched a responsible business education report late last year. I'd had a number of discussions with different schools about how to measure some of the different activities, both around the teaching that they were providing to students, around the nature of the courses, the nature of the experience, the opportunities that were being provided by schools or by students themselves in this field, everything ranging from engagement with the wider community to opportunities to work with non-profits, to thinking about impact and social impact funds, and then, of course, more widely, the research agenda of the business schools and their operations management, what they were doing to try to deliver perhaps a lower carbon footprint in the operations of their infrastructure, in their approaches to engagement with not only academics and students, but the wider community of employees and staff on campus, and then their engagement particularly with their local communities and perhaps some of the underserved groups around the world. Very difficult to build any consensus around precisely how to measure or how to quantify some of these different contributions. There's been some great work, of course, done by the network of responsible business management academics, trying to refocus publications and research areas into this field. In the academic space, of course, the AACSB, with its new guidelines just being launched and discussed at the moment, likewise from the other international accrediting agencies, have been reflecting this work. And then there have been some individual examples of publications and entities trying to tap into the field. But still very much, it seems to me, without any real consensual approach to measuring what constitutes impact, what schools should be doing. So a great demand, a great pressure, lots of interesting innovation, but still very qualitative. So in our report that we launched late last year, we decided that we would essentially try to crowdsource a little bit as a first step, and we encouraged schools to submit examples of what they were doing, best practice around these areas of teaching, of research, of student projects and operations management. And we put examples of those to an external panel of people drawn from the world of research, from business, from social impact organizations, from non-profits and the UN, to ask them what they thought. Amongst them were some interesting examples. We didn't try to deliver a sort of falsely quantitative measure, but we tried to highlight 20 examples of best innovative practice in each of those 4 areas in a first publication late last year. And we've since been trying to refine it, developing some of the hypotheses and the insights and the ideas and suggestions around metrics, including a second edition of our network analysis that we put together in the spring in a recent publication that was trying to particularly hone in around academic publications and how we could try to measure impact, both in traditional ways around publications, and also looking at some wider measures, both citations and sort of the impact as measured by the wider academic community, but also going more widely, looking at some of the measures, for example, used by Altmetric. So how far articles were being picked up on social media, being reflected in policy documents, part of the wider community that's not simply in the academic world, but is trying to sort of provide a yardstick of that impact and resonance and implementation with businesses, organizations, the wider community. Kevin, I don't know, can you hear us?
Now I can hear you. Can you hear me?
That's great. Yes, good to see. You might want to just tilt your screen slightly. That's perfect, so we can see you. So, Kevin, I mean, just tell us a little bit from your perspective what you're seeing in terms of the drivers of demand for a greater focus on responsibility, on social impact amongst students.
Oh, there are so many things going on right now. The idea that what this pandemic has taught us is how interconnected we are. And our students are responding vehemently saying, what can we learn in a business school that will help us address vast societal problems that have social impact? They're seeing the devastation around us. They're seeing the fault lines that have been exposed in our society, in our economy by the pandemic. So this is a firestorm. We are hearing over and over again from students, what are we as universities going to do to address these really grave societal problems? So that ship has sailed. This is the new normal for us. I'm 100% convinced.
And your university, of course, has got a particularly rich and long historical tradition, I guess, around some of these areas. Was that important in terms of the sensitivity to it, or the track record on which you could build?
Yes, I think it is. Without waxing too poetic, there are four universal precepts that guide education at a Jesuit university. One is to approach God with prayer, and it doesn't matter if you are a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew or an atheist. It's the idea that we're all interconnected, that there's a spark of the divine in all of us. And what we're seeing in the last 6 weeks especially, but the prior 3 or 4 years is what happens when when everyone becomes the other. And that certainly has been the theme of late, that it's been this idea of pitting one blue state against a red state, or the United States versus China, or whatever. So that's one part of the Jesuit education. The other part is to approach our students with joy, with love, and to see and to approach them not just as revenue producers, but as partners. And then perhaps more directly, Andrew, is the last two precepts, one of which is to walk with the poor. And that preposition "with" is a big deal. It's not walk at the poor or talk to the poor, it's walk with the poor. And the last precept is this notion that we have to care for our common home, the planet. And all of those things, those four precepts, have never, I would argue, never been more important than they are now. So we have a really long tradition, not just us, and not just Jesuit schools, but within the Jesuit universe, a really long tradition of those precepts guiding what we do, which leads to a more just, humane, and sustainable world. And that's our mission.
Great. Kevin, just tilt your screen up slightly so we can see your face. That's a bit more. That's just a little bit more.
Right, sorry.
That's perfect. Thank you. And if you were to go back, I don't know, let's say 5, 10, 15 years, what might be some of the early pioneering initiatives that you were taking within the business school that maybe you're starting to see real traction around or being building elsewhere?
Yeah, one thing is the introduction, the willful introduction of Ignatian pedagogy. We have a Center for Ignatian Pedagogy. So Ignatian pedagogy is built on the idea that every student comes with their own context. So imagine an African-American student in Chicago coming from a poor neighborhood and a very wealthy white kid coming from the suburbs. They're coming from very different contexts. very different socioeconomic brackets, which is their personal experience, but also the resources they have. So are there enough healthcare facilities in this neighborhood? Are there enough restaurants or grocery stores in this neighborhood? So Ignatian pedagogy requires us to think about that. It also requires people to reflect, to think about what their values are and how their experience has shaped those values. And finally, it leads to this idea of action that about 10 or 15 years ago, a very willful approach at Loyola to say, okay, you've gotten this education. What are you going to do with that education? And how does that fit in with your values? So there's been widespread training of that, and we use that in statistics courses and economic courses, and we should use it more often, but we're moving that way. Another very concrete example is something that Accenture said was the single most innovative and disruptive thing in higher education in the United States. About 4 years ago, we founded a community college within Loyola called Arrupe. Father Arrupe was a Jesuit leader. And we took in our first class 175 kids who would have never got into Loyola based on test scores. Because as you know, socioeconomic factors drive standardized test scores. That first class had 5 kids who were homeless, living in cars. We had 40 kids who were DACA kids, undocumented. So we formed a community college that was designed to take kids who have not had a fair shake in life and say, we are going to give you a private school education. We're going to have numbers of advisors. We're going to bring confidence to the table. Well, let me put that in context. I have 2,100 undergraduates in my business school and 3 academic advisors. Arrupe has got 300 kids, 5 academic advisors, 2 social workers, a job placement person, a college placement person. And the idea is to show to Chicago and to the United States, we can find kids who are bright as can be, who have not gotten the same chances that other people have, and get them a quality education. We charge them 1/4 maybe of our tuition. So when they graduate with an associate degree, they have no student debt. To put metrics on this, the 2-year graduation rate for community colleges in Chicago ranges from about 10 to about 14%. We had 85% of our kids get their associate degree. That's unprecedented in the United States. So it's showing this idea of cura personalis, of caring for the whole person, which is the bedrock of a Jesuit education. This model is, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was saying it's a really interesting argument because, perhaps more than any individual course or wider initiative that business schools do, would a move towards greater affordability and different admissions criteria to really provide inclusion to training that we think ought to be economically empowering be the most fundamental thing any business school could do.
Absolutely. And as part of that, I'm sure other business schools are doing that. We are going to bringing entrepreneurial education into inner city high schools. It's reaching out to where people are, as opposed to saying, all right, we're going to offer the same degree, the same curriculum, the same standards, the same tuition that we have forever. That's just not going to fly anymore. Especially in the light of this pandemic, when financial resources have been crushed. We cannot continue to say, yeah, we're going to do the same old, same old. It's just not going to work.
And it's interesting, because obviously different people have different perspectives and definitions of what, of course, social impact or responsibility really means. And clearly at the moment, the whole question of sustainability and climate change is very core. But, what would be the other ones that you would put right at the top of your list? And it sounds like inclusion, social mobility, economic access and growth would be fundamental.
Yeah, that's a great question. We are just finishing our strategic plan, and we're going to try to do something. We're hoping we can pull this off, because this will not be easy. But to introduce a theme into the business school to say, undergraduate, graduate, faculty, and staff, let's tackle a key theme. And for us, that theme is going to be poverty. And underneath, so poverty and sustainability are not different issues; they're related issues. But in the city of Chicago, we really have 2 cities going on, one rich and one poor. So the zip code that my school is in, 60610, if it were a country, it would have among the highest life expectancies in the world. You go 3 miles west of my zip code, and the life expectancy drops about 25 years. So for us, poverty manifests itself in so many ways. And with the pandemic and with supply chains being disrupted, it accentuates if you don't have a sustainable supply chain, if you don't have healthcare, if you don't have education in the poorer parts of town, things just get exponentially worse. So we're going to attempt to bring all the resources of our school on poverty, and we'll divide it up. We have some people who are great at sustainability, and some people are great at entrepreneurship and work towards a common goal.
And let's just think about some of those wider areas of social impact. I mean, what else are you doing, and are you seeing elsewhere that you think needs greater focus in this broader concept of responsible business education?
I think, to me, and maybe it's because I'm in Chicago, there's a huge question about, especially given the number of African Americans who've been incarcerated in the United States and in Chicago. So what do we do as a business school and further as a university to help bring people back into society? And this is a problem we're working on right this second, because one of the big questions is how do you keep people in prison with the virus? So what happens when these prisoners leave? So that's a healthcare question, that's a business question, that's an entrepreneurship question, that's a social work question. So that's one issue that we are taking under our scrutiny, and it allows us to tap into the resources of the whole university. And I think, Andrew, that's really an important thought, that we always talk about breaking down silos. Well, heck, we have a hard enough time doing that within a business school. But what can we do? How does a business school collaborate with the School of Public Health and with social work and with the Institute for Environmental Sustainability? Because no one is going to solve issues like what do we do to help prisoners re-enter society on their own. So that, I think, is also, I hope, going to be the new normal, that the dean of the business school is not a separate baron, and the dean of the School of Public Health is not a separate baroness where we don't work together, because these big problems are going to call for big cooperation.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I mean, I've written some stuff about particularly schools in the US working on those who are incarcerated or recently released, and clearly there's a huge outreach role that could be played in teaching basic business skills. But you also make a good point about working very much with the disadvantaged more generally in the communities around the universities and business schools. And we saw it when we were looking at our assessment of responsible business education around the world, whether it was in working with First Nations or Indigenous peoples in Canada, or indeed in Australia and New Zealand, equally in South Africa, where of course a number of the schools are very close to the townships and shanty towns. And that sense of real engagement with those who are geographically very close, but in a completely different place, socially and economically, seems to be a really important and empowering one.
Yes, it really does. And in Chicago and elsewhere, the issue of food deserts and healthcare deserts is of key importance. So one of the things we're doing, we have a student-run group called Loyola Limited, and they they run businesses. And what we're doing running these businesses, so we have a bicycle repair shop. And so we need student workers, especially in the summer. So in the summer, we reach out to the local high schools and say, come here for 3 months. You will work in our bike shop or the bakery or whatever it is. And we will help you think in an entrepreneurial mindset, and we will pay you, and we will get you used to the idea of being on campus. So you can walk through these gates. We should open them up. We should walk through these gates. You could be here. And to me, Andrew, that's such a big issue. The idea of students from marginalized neighborhoods seeing themselves in a university. Yeah, I can do this. And the more ways we can come into their home, their school, and have them come into our home, our school, the more those bridges are built, the more we'll get those, we'll give the confidence. What we're hearing from our kids who are really coming from the kids who are homeless, who are desperately poor, is that if they don't do well on a test, they think, I can't do this. I'm a failure. If I didn't do well on a test in college, that happened with alarming regularity, I knew it was my fault. I knew that I didn't study that night or I went to the baseball, whatever, but I never doubted my ability. It's confidence is such a huge driver in this.
So we're talking here, for those who've joined us more recently, with Kevin Stevens from Loyola University, Quinlan, and your school, Kevin, was one actually that was highlighted by a lot of the judges in our expert panel in our Responsible Business Education report. I wonder if we might just go very briefly through. There were 3 areas that they picked out. One of them was around thinking about just actually operations management, which I guess is often perhaps overlooked in these discussions. So what business schools are doing to walk the talk in their own functioning operations. And you, for example, have this Schreiber Center, I believe, don't you?
Right.
Do you want to just say a few words about that?
Yeah, the Schreiber Center is this new, 5 years old now, steel and glass school, and there are a lot of steel and glass school buildings around. But this is designed to do a couple things. One, to look out to the world and have the world look into us. More important, it's as green as can be. So, for example, our thermostats turn different colors, and when they turn green, it means watch out, the windows are going to open up, or we're going to have natural airflow. It has an immense amount of light streaming in. If you picked up one of our red chairs and turned it over, on the bottom you would see a Coca-Cola insignia, of all things. Each of our chairs, not each, but each of our chairs in our common areas are made out of 101 Coke bottles. All the soap in the washrooms throughout the university are made from. We collect the cooking oil from universities and hospitals across Chicago, and in our Institute of Environmental Sustainability, we process that into soap. We run shuttle buses between our business school campus and our arts and science campus and our healthcare campus, and the buses are run on that fuel from repurposed cooking oil. So there's a wealth of things going on. The light, when I walk into my office or if I walk into a classroom, the lights dim automatically or come on automatically. So kind of common sense stuff, but our goal is within the next 3 years, so don't quote me on that, but in the near future that the university will be carbon neutral.
That's great. So Kevin, you've now been joined, I'm delighted to say, also by Sanjay Gupta from Michigan. Hello, Sanjay, could you hear us?
Very much so. And sorry about but technology snafus. Can you hear me?
It's a challenge. Yes, we can hear you. Kevin, could you hear Sanjay as well?
No, I'm sorry. I can see you, Sanjay, but I can't hear you.
Okay, well, I'll translate if necessary, as long as you can hear me. But Sanjay, so we've been talking about this growing trend for responsible business education. We were just talking with Kevin about operations management and issues around, the climate footprint, amongst other things, of the business schools themselves. But just by way of introduction, Michigan, give us a sense of the big forces for change that you're hearing from students, from faculty, from your wider stakeholders. Is this really in the zeitgeist as an area that you're seeing the need for change and transformation and focus around?
Absolutely. And once again, thanks for inviting me. I'm sorry that a little late getting into the chat. There is a great deal of interest from the student body in terms of thinking about sustainable business models and how that can get operationalized when they are going to join their place of work. How can they take their educational training in terms of the foundational skills and understandings, and then be able to apply it whenever they are going to get hired? So we've really try to address that need through in our curriculum and coursework, but also through the experiences that we are able to provide them outside of the classes. And increasingly, faculty are adopting that in their own curriculum in very nice ways. So, you can take any of those disciplinary areas. So, for example, we are ranked number one in supply chain management, and all of the issues around sustainability and businesses that are responsible in managing their global footprints has taken on a very intense debate and very intense interest, both amongst the students as well as the faculty. With this COVID-19 epidemic that we are going through, pandemic, I guess one of the areas that our faculty in the supply chain group has been able to do is work with folks in the medical sciences and actually think about the decontamination of the PPEs so that they can be reused. And they came up with a process that uses hydrogen peroxide and some kind of a fumigation process that is very different from the heating process that you might have heard about being used elsewhere. And we have done that in our veterinary medicine clinics to be able to reuse the PPEs in a very nice way. And our supply chain faculty members played a very important role in working alongside with our medical experts to make that happen together with the regional hospital complex, Sparrow Hospitals.
So it's a great point, Sanjay. Kevin, Sanjay was just making the point about coronavirus and how they've been able to reorientate some of their work specifically to kind of serve the local community with this current crisis. What do you think, Kevin and Loyola, both in terms of what perhaps you've been able to do in that space, but also more generally is, because of the sort of existential changes, not only in terms of health, but longer term economic disruption, do you think coronavirus is an opportunity, or does it risk sort of setting back a lot of the initiatives that were being taken more generally on social impact in your school?
No, I think I think Sanjay's on the right path. It's a huge opportunity. We had a conference last week, a webinar, I should say, the first joint webinar between Quinlan, the School of Business, and we have a brand new Parkinson School of Public Health and Health Sciences. And the purpose of the first two purposes of the first webinar was to kind of walk people through the phases that we should expect to see. As when will we get back to whatever the new normal is? And I know there's been a lot of talk about this, and we were talking about more specifically in the greater Chicago area. The second purpose of that webinar, we had about 300 people on it from government agencies and community agencies and corporations and non-for-profits, was to build a community to say, all right, how can we reach out to each other? So one thing that I think is real helpful for universities is to provide a safe place to meet. So you can get so for example, as part of this ongoing collaboration between the business school and the School of Public Health, we're going to bring in people from some of the big pharmaceutical companies in the area and say, here's what we're learning about the virus. Here are the supply chain issues that we're seeing. Here's a solution that worked, and here's something that blew up in our face. So I think the idea of collaborating, across the business school and an engineering school and a public health school and a social work school to say, all right, what are the common issues we're facing? And then for us, I think one of the roles that business schools have to take on is we'll be the nexus to reach out to the partners around us outside the university and the partners within. And the coronavirus cuts across all those things. It just does. And for the business school, particularly supply chain seems to be the issue du jour, right? And that's such a big deal. So I think this is a huge opportunity. This is our moment to rethink our tuition. This is our moment to rethink where are we in the community, we being the business school, and where are we within the university, and how are we going to address this virus, which I don't think is going away for, I'm not a doctor, but I don't think it's going away for a while.
No, and Sanjay, that's a great point Kevin raises. We were discussing earlier before you joined as well about the significant contribution potentially of business schools to social mobility and offering greater access to disadvantaged communities to provide growth. I mean, he mentioned just there the issue of tuition fees, of course, and then more generally admissions criteria for different sorts of groups from non-traditional background, first generation, and so on. Is that something that you're active in reflecting on as well?
Yeah, very much so. And I appreciate Kevin's point on this because in some sense, we have a wonderful opportunity to reevaluate access to higher education. And especially, if we go across our institutions to be able to figure out a pathway whereby we can bring expertise from the various institutions in a synergistic way with access in mind as the ultimate byproduct of this. So we are absolutely thinking very much so about that and how can we change the educational paradigm in a way that access can become part and parcel of this new way of doing things. So, we are talking very, even as we speak, trying to reevaluate and redesign our core courses in the undergraduate program, where we have, several hundred students participating in that, and trying to think, how do we do it in a way that can think about this digital revolution, but the digitization medium, and allow us to sort of do this even for technical areas in ways that can be much better received by the students than a straight lecture format and in those large sections. I think this is a singular opportunity we have, and so I very much agree with Kevin as to how we can reevaluate all of the different things that we've been doing in business schools and where business schools can be the leaders. At Michigan State, I just have firmed up a plan to work with my colleagues in arts and letters and natural science and business to really think about education and technology in these large core courses in the undergraduate program. The three colleges are going to work together to think about how do you do peer-to-peer learning? How do you do group work? How do you do assessments when you have, several hundred students participating in these kinds of courses? And I think we will figure out a pathway that will make it happen.
So we've got a couple of questions here. Maybe I'll go first to you, Kevin, and then to Sanjay. So Lance Nail's asking about, he agrees on the importance of cross-disciplinary work, and we've talked more generally about the wider activities on social impact. But how do we accomplish this effectively and efficiently when faculty performance reviews remain largely, and I think unfortunately the end of the question fell off, but I guess it's around more traditional reward criteria for promotion. How do we include some of these wider factors in the promotion structures to incentivize staff and the wider institutions to be more actively involved?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm an accounting professor, so if it doesn't get measured, it doesn't get valued, right? And so I think it's an explicit policy change at the university to say this is what we value, and this is what is going to count towards promotion and tenure. But I think it also backs up that when we hire faculty, it has to be an explicit part of the conversation to say, here's where we're going as a university. We are going towards cross-disciplinary research and teaching that focuses on grave societal problems. So if you come to our institution, this is what you should expect. So it's a process, right? Because we all have senior faculty who've been here a long time. I'm a senior faculty. I've been here a long time. But I think it's being willful about it, and being explicit on both the evaluation end and on the hiring end. If we don't change our policies, then faculty will be more reluctant to change. That's absolutely true.
Mm-hmm. Sanjay, what would you do? Or what are you doing perhaps in this field?
Yeah, I think that one area that provides a wonderful opportunity for us for the cross-disciplinary emphasis to come through is from teaching, because on the research dimension, there is all that disciplinary emphasis and focus and the paradigms that have been established in the various disciplines that becomes much more difficult to break through. But if you think about teaching, and I mentioned to you the collaboration that we are having with arts and letters and with natural science and business around developing the pedagogical techniques to be able to think about the issues of peer assessments and teamwork and such that can make the large sections, the large classes sort of come alive and become meaningful and academically rigorous. This brings together people from different disciplines who are tackling essentially similar problems, but in the context of their own subject matter, right? And so I have a feeling that all of us from different areas trying to tackle the issues around education in this remote online framework that is being pushed through this COVID-19 crisis is going to bring people from different parts of the campus together in a much better way than simply sort of force feeding people into saying, you're going to do joint interdisciplinary research. I mean, I think that doesn't quite happen that way, but I'm very optimistic that what the teaching opportunity provides for bringing people from different disciplines together in the same platform, because everybody's trying to tackle similar problems and issues.
So there's a related question here from, I see Andrew Crisp has joined us from Carrington Crisp, but he says we're seeing growing demand for cross-disciplinary degrees in our student research, but there's sometimes a roadblock with siloed research journals and academics keen to publishing them, which are still very narrowly focused. So in other words, the conservatism in the journal publishing world over research and themes that are cross-disciplinary and go outside those silos. Kevin, how can we tackle that structural problem, do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me give a parallel example. So there are, in the accounting field, there are a couple educational journals, pedagogical journals. So does this technique work in your classroom? And at some schools, those are valued, and other schools are like, no, that's not what we're interested in, narrow field journals. So I think it's a culture change to say, what else do we do here in the business school or the university? Certainly one goal is to develop deep knowledge in narrow areas. That's one goal. Another goal is to develop better pedagogical techniques. 20 years ago, that would have been like, no way. Education journals, they don't mean anything. I think now what we're going to see is, hey, here is something that the university values, but what's going to drive this? This is going to be organic. Once you take a business school faculty member and ally her with someone from public health and ally both of them with somebody from economics or whatever or wherever, it's going to be more fun. It's going to be more creative. I think it will happen organically if the deans and the provosts can help break down those barriers, which are often structural, different tuition pricing, different teaching loads, all that stuff. I think organically people will embrace the opportunity. And since faculty are self-policing when it comes to tenure and promotion, once more faculty are involved in that type of research, I think it will become more the norm.
Sanjay.
I was going to also mention that the other opportunity for multidisciplinary collaborations comes in the grant-funded research. If you step away for a little bit from the journal publication process to thinking about grant-funded research, there the opportunities for cross-disciplinary work is much more rich. I have a great example that recently transpired between a faculty member in business, was in the supply chain area, and another faculty member who was in fisheries and wildlife. And they collaborated on an NSF project that is looking at an interesting phenomenon that brought the disciplinary focus of both of these people together in a very nice way. It's an $800,000 grant that they got, and they are both able to see the opportunities to be able to publish the outcome of this research project in both of their areas. And they will be able to co-author it. Now, obviously, the slant that my supply chain faculty member is going to have to give is what are the issues tied to the supply chain issues in their research grant, whereas the fisheries and wildlife faculty member would be focusing on something slightly different. But I think the reason why they were successful in attracting this grant was because they were both able to bring the disciplinary focus in a very nice new way to tackle a problem. And I think increasingly as business schools start to become much more accepting and begin to emphasize that grant-funded research will count towards tenure and promotion in significant ways, then I think we will be able to break this logjam. Now, the journal part of it is still an important roadblock that we have to overcome. But I think that will also gradually happen as you find more and more people working on projects that are of common interest.
So it's great we've got two actual accounting professors here with us, because going to your point, Kevin, earlier about measurement, the importance of measurement. Obviously, this is one of the challenges, isn't it? I mean, the FT, as you know, does rankings. Obviously, there is an appetite and a need for some degree to try and quantify all these great but very complex and varied initiatives. Do you have any thoughts, Kevin, first, on what and how to measure and try to get a sense of the real impact of what Loyola is doing in the field of social impact?
Well, that's a great question. I think it would come down to measures such as we have an initiative with Cook County Prison right now. And so right now I mentioned before about prisoners, particularly women prisoners. So now we have an effort that we are just starting to say, who do we need to work with on providing services? How much research can we do with social work? Can we develop a joint program with the School of Social Work, which we can? Can we develop a joint program with the law school and measure the outcomes of that work together? So how many women got placed in jobs? How many women got help from social work? So I'm thinking of very tangible measures of how we impact the community. So we've been doing this for a while under AACSB about innovation, engagement, and impact. I think it's taken it to the next level and looking for metrics that reflect what's going on in the community more so than what's necessarily just going on within us. It's a great question. I think it's one of the more difficult questions to answer. We have to answer that question. I think that would be a great topic for another meeting like this to say, what are you doing to measure the impact of this cross-cultural work? Because that's not something we're accustomed to doing.
Sanjay, what would you think? How can we and what should we be measuring around social impact to try and look at the relative innovations of some of the different business schools that are pioneering this work?
One measure of impact is the student engagement, and not something that we very easily bring into the picture. We have an initiative, we call it the Spartan Global Development Fund. And the students engaged in this initiative are trying to promote entrepreneurship in Guatemala. And they are doing that through microfinance loans and so on. So they travel to Guatemala a couple of times a year, really solicit ideas around projects and so forth that especially women over there can take on and use their microfinance loans to be able to jumpstart those processes. The number of students that are involved in this kind of an endeavor, the number of projects that they are able to support, the number of faculty members that they rely on for mentoring and guidance, all of this forms a very nice ecosystem that connects faculty to students to community. And increasingly, we have to think about, how do you measure this impact? Whether it is the number of projects that were started, the number of community members that were impacted. Of course, you can look at the number of jobs that were created and so on, or the amount of merchandise that these entrepreneurs were able to actually sell. But it's also the number of students that got excited about participating in this kind of an endeavor, and the number of faculty members that they were able to rely on. So not our traditional measures, perhaps, but these are ways that we in the business school, we should take it upon ourselves to expound and to share with others and say that these are important measures of social impact that we should be talking about. And I think the more we discuss this, whether it is the initiative that Kevin mentioned with prisoners and being able to talk about the impact associated with that, it may not necessarily be a singular measure of impact, but describing the stakeholders and describing the outreach that was associated with those social impact projects, I think would become powerful narratives to be able to exhibit what is the quantity of the impact, if you will.
Instead of going to Kevin first, so the ASSB, as we said, has just launched their new 2020 standards, which include a greater focus on social impact. How important do you think that will be? And have you been involved in the debate to see whether those new benchmarks are ones that will drive a lot of increasing improvement by schools?
I think it's a great step. I think it's a movement towards this idea that we are of the community. Been a long time coming for us to say we are parts of the communities. You think of the typical campus with gates around it and fences. That's not a good look, right? So I think the ASCSB will help drive that. I think it's the more we partner with the community and evidence how we do that, the better off we're going to be. So who are your students? Who gets admitted to your school? Who helps shape your curricula? So we all have advisory boards. Do you have people? How diverse is your advisory board? And I don't mean diversity in a narrow sense. I mean, do you have community partners in there? Do you have non-for-profits in there? Do you represent the community that you live in? I think that will help drive. Those are measurable outcomes that will help drive more social impact. But yes, having the ASCSB put this front and center, it's always good to have. We need pressure on both fronts. We need pressure from deans, pressure from faculty, and pressure from the outside, and pressure from organizations such as yours, Andrew. The rating agencies have got a lot to play in this game. And if things focus on the top traditional academic journals and continue to do that, that will not be as helpful as it could be. So it's going to take all of us collectively to say this is what we want to accomplish.
Sanjay, would you agree?
Yeah, very much so. And I think another idea that is tied to this is how we as deans encourage our faculty to participate as mentors or advisors in community organizations, So while we have our own advisory boards, we also have faculty who have got expertise in business matters and such, and to the extent they can actually participate on an advisory board of a community organization, I think that can provide that organization with some expertise that they would have on their board, and it would build out a much richer portfolio of the social impact that we are having, right? So imagine being able to describe that, okay, we are committed to social impact. How do we do it? Well, okay, yeah, we serve, through our students, but our faculty are also an important stakeholder who could serve the community in interesting ways and have a much larger bang for the buck in that way.
So we're going towards the end of the hour, and I'm really conscious of your time and very grateful that you've both been able to join us for this discussion. And thanks also to those others who are watching now or will do later. We remain committed to this whole field of responsible business education and social impact. And we've heard some great examples from Sanjay and Kevin of what their schools are doing, and then more generally, including the ASCSB and others. So I hope you'll continue to be engaged in these discussions, refinement initiatives, and ways that all of us can do more in this field. But thank you, Sanjay and Kevin, most of all, for joining us in this new virtual challenging world, one where, of course, coronavirus is sort of dominating the conversation, but it sounds like you're both pretty optimistic that at least it's been an opportunity to help refocus and perhaps accelerate rather than slow down broader initiatives in the field of social impact.
Absolutely. I mean, I completely agree. And there is just a lot of conversation, at least at our school, and so I'm sure that's the same at Kevin's and other places as well. I'm very encouraged.
Thanks very much for both of you to your time, and keep in touch.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you so much.
Andrew.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Kevin.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.